An old Indian chief was teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he told the young boy. A fight between two wolves. One is evil, full of anger, sorrow, regret, greed, self pity, and false pride. The other is good, full of joy, peace, love, humility, kindness, and faith. This same fight is going on inside you, grandson, and inside every other person on the face of the earth. The grandson ponders this for a moment and then asks, Grandfather, which wolf will win? And the grandfather smiles and simply said, the one you feed. That's a Native American story. That's our parable of the day. And this is Access the PodQuest. Okay, we're going to have a little bit more fun here. We're going to talk about another topic that really isn't exactly tight, more loose, but here it is. Good or evil, or good and evil, would Hitler swerve? All right. This is going to be, again, a loose inquiry into morality. I'm going to throw some ideas around and start the show's discussion about good and evil, kind of a philosophical hodgepodge, if you will, in a way. And you'll see what I'm talking about as things get a little bit scrambled, but I'll try and keep it together. All right. Is really trying to find out, what is good and evil? Are we good and evil? Are we good or evil as human beings? And really, what's the standard for measuring this? And better yet, what should the measure be? All right. In essence, I'm going to be blending two concepts together. First, again, are people inherently good or evil? And two, is there a proper standard of what good and evil is in the first place? And maybe those two questions should be switched around. I'm not sure, but I guess as we go, we're gonna see. Let's start with whether people are naturally good or evil. And here's what the Smithsonian Associates.org website says about that subject. Reading from their site, for centuries, philosophers have attempted to answer the question of whether humans are naturally good or evil. Despite the publication of thousands of works on the subject, no satisfactory answer seems to have been found. And there's another study that's similar, okay? Well, maybe not similar, but it touches on the same theme. And this is from BBC Earth. All right, it says this. Maybe the two most famous opposing views on this debate are those of Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Hobbes describes humans as nasty and brutish, needing society and rules to rein in their instincts in order to thrive. Later, Rousseau openly criticized him, arguing instead that man would be gentle and pure without the corruption of greed and inequality caused by the class system imposed by our society. And there are a lot of other articles out there, a lot of other studies in the same vein. And so it's easy to conclude that really there's no universal consensus on the subject of whether people are inherently good or evil. But again, maybe that's putting, the cart before the horse, so to speak. Do we first have to establish the standard? What is the standard of good and evil? And there's been a lot of thinking on that subject as well, of course, throughout the ages. And it's broken down into, broad categories, if you will. There's the religious perspective. All right? In many religions, the standard of good and evil is tied to what a deity would say, God or Allah, or whatever the creative force is that, one points to within their religion. And so that's pretty much a dominant it's dominant thinking about what is good and what's evil. At least that's been the way it's been for a very, very long time. There's also something known as moral absolutism, and that holds that that says that good and evil are fixed concepts. Regardless of cultural context or individual settings and interpretations, there's something that, it's absolutely, unquestionable. These things, there's good, and there's evil. It might not refer to a deity or what a God might say, but there's some, absolute rules on that. A moral relativism is exactly the opposite. In contrast, it's saying, that what's good and what's evil depends upon the setting and the culture, the situation, and whether or not, so the facts kind of fit the circumstances, if you will. There's other things, universal morality. Some will argue that despite cultural differences, certain core principles like, nonviolence and fairness, they have to be, considered universally good. Seems to me that kind of is in the category of, moral absolutism, but it's a little different And there are distinctions here that I'm not quite that sure about, but this is basically saying, look, there are some things that are beyond question that are good and evil. All right. And then, of course, there's utilitarianism, which is basically saying, look, if it's something that's, it's good if it satisfies the desires and is good for the most people that it could possibly be good for. I really kind of botched the way that is, but you kind of get the point. I'll read my notes. That's maybe better. Something is good if it generates the best result for the most people. All right. So that's utilitarianism. Right? And so those are like kind of the broad categories, and you're kind of meshing that together with people, and are they inherently good or evil? That's kind of what I'm doing here. And I'm thinking it might be more complex than I'm thinking, or more than I'm kind of putting out there. So I wanted to kind of do a thought experiment to kind of elaborate on whether this is a more subtle question or not. Okay. So here's the thought experiment. Let's say you're driving down the road and a squirrel jumps out. Okay. Almost everybody in the world, okay, is going to swerve to avoid hitting that squirrel. Right? It's a bit of universal morality, okay? And so that would ask the question, doesn't that in itself suggest that people are inherently good? They don't want to harm an innocent living thing, right? But what about this? Let's assume that it's not you driving down the road, but Adolf Hitler is driving down the road. Adolf Hitler's driving down the road in his VW Beetle. Okay, that's what he was driving, apparently. Maybe he wasn't driving it, but somebody else was driving it, I'm sure, for him. But whatever. All right. Anyway, if he's driving down the road and he sees a squirrel jump out, what would he do? Let's assume he swerves to avoid the squirrel, just like most everybody else. What does that say? Does that say, well, then, wait a second. I mean, how can that be? He's an evil, probably the most evil person that's ever lived, almost unquestionably, certainly in the discussion. So what does that say about our idea? And then switch it around. Now Mother Teresa's driving down the road, okay? She's traveling down. I don't know what kind of car she's driving. Doesn't matter, obviously. But would she swerve? Let's say she doesn't. She plows through, okay? Let's say that's what happens. She goes through, squishes the squirrel, obliterates it, it's gone. She just didn't even think about it. She thought about it and she said, screw it, I'm going. What does that say? Does that suggest, do those kind of ideas suggest that there's more to it than that maybe there's a mixture of good and bad within people? And then that kind of scrambles the idea of what is the standard of good and evil. It just, all of it gets a little bit messier. And so anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out again, this thought experiment, just kind of as a taste of what's to come, because we are going to want to develop on this show, on Access the Podcast, want to develop this idea of what is the proper standard of determining whether something's good or something's evil. All right, so stay tuned. We're going to be talking to people, experts in the area of philosophy and human behavior and all of that, and cutting-edge theorists on the subject to kind of get to that determination. In the meantime, go to our website, as always, accessthepodquest.com. Let us know your thoughts. Come back here to YouTube. Go ahead and like our video, absolutely. Go ahead and share our video, absolutely, and even more absolutely. Join us as a subscriber to the show. And you guys go there, we will be going ever forward.